Good evening. I am Lauren Bush-Lauren, and I'm very excited to introduce our first author tonight. Jon Meacham is an esteemed biographer who has won many awards for his work, including a Pulitzer Prize for his biography of Andrew Jackson, American Lion. Jon was a longtime editor of Newsweek magazine, is a contributing editor of Time magazine, but we are sure that his most important contribution to the literary history is soon to come with his book on R. Gampy, George H.W. Bush. Here to share his most recent bestseller, Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, is our friend Jon Meacham.
I try not to refer to him as Gampy. I think that would cross a line. Mr. President, Mrs. Bush, Neil and Maria, thank you. Lauren, thank you. It's a very generous introduction. I want to say a point of personal privilege quickly. Whenever I am called esteemed or anything like that, which I have to leave my house to do, I'm reminded of an event 2 or 3 years ago in Washington. It was a book event on the Washington Mall. Wonderful occasion, lots of readers, lots of writers, and I was on my way to give my talk about Andrew Jackson at that time. And a woman ran up to me and said, "Oh my God, it's you." I said, "Well, yes, existentially speaking, that's exactly right." She said, "Will you wait right here? You have to sign my book." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I'll be right here." So I stood there, and hand to God, she came back with John Grisham's latest novel. So Mr. Esteemed right here, there is a woman somewhere with a forged John Grisham book. It was a classic George Bush kind of thing. You can't embarrass her, so I just wrote J with a big line across it. She didn't know she had found a shorter, less handsome, and much less rich John Grisham. I'm honored to be here. Thank you. I would like to read from Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. It's Washington, D.C., in the winter of 1801. He woke at first light. Lean and loose-limbed, Thomas Jefferson tossed back the sheets in his room at Conrad and McMunn's boarding house on Capitol Hill, swung his long legs out of bed, and plunged his feet into a basin of cold water, a lifelong habit he believed good for his health. At Monticello, his plantation in the Southwest Mountains near the Blue Ridge of Virginia, the metal bucket brought to Jefferson every morning wore a groove on the floor next to the alcove where he slept. 6'2.5", Jefferson was nearly 58 years old in the Washington winter of 1800 to 1801. His sandy hair, reddish in his youth, was graying. His freckled skin, always susceptible to the sun, was wrinkling a bit. His eyes were penetrating but elusive, alternately described as blue, hazel, or brown. He had great teeth. It was early February 1801. The Capitol, with its muddy avenues and scattered buildings, was in chaos and had been for weeks. The future of the presidency was uncertain, the stability of the Constitution in question, and secluded inside Conrad and McMunn's on New Jersey Avenue, a new establishment with stables for 60 horses, just 200 paces away from the unfinished Capitol building. Thomas Jefferson was in a quiet agony. He soaked his feet and gathered his thoughts. After a vicious election in which he had challenged the incumbent president, John Adams, it turned out that while Jefferson had defeated Adams in the popular vote, the tall Virginian had received the same number of electoral votes for president as the dashing, charismatic, and unpredictable Aaron Burr of New York. He had been running as Jefferson's vice president. Under the rules in effect in 1800, there was no way to distinguish between a vote for president and one for vice president. What was supposed to have been a peaceful transfer of power from one rival to another, from Adams to Jefferson, had instead produced a constitutional crisis. Anxious and unhappy, Jefferson was, he wrote to his eldest daughter, worn down here with pursuits in which I take no delight, surrounded by enemies and spies, catching and perverting every word which falls from my lips or flows from my pen, and inventing where facts fail them. His fate was in the hands of other men, the last place he wanted it to be. He hated the waiting, the whispers, the not knowing, but there was nothing he could do, and so Thomas Jefferson waited. The election, Jefferson said, was the theme of all conversation. The tie between Jefferson and Burr, with Adams not so far behind, threw the contest to the House of Representatives, and no one knew what would happen. It was suddenly a whole new election taking place in the House, where each of the 16 state delegations had one vote to cast. So whoever won 9 of those votes would become president. The crisis is momentous, the Washington Federalist newspaper declared. Could Burr, who admitted that he thought of politics as fun and honor and profit, be made president by mischievous Federalists, taking the election from Jefferson, a fellow Republican? Or could Jefferson's foes elect an interim president, denying Jefferson and his Republicans ultimate power? Such thoughts terrified Jefferson, who confessed that he felt bound to protect the principles of '76 he had articulated in the Declaration of Independence. If he, the choice of a majority of the electorate, lost the presidency, then what had Americans been fighting for all these years? So much was at stake. Disorder, which Jefferson hated, threatened harmony, which he loved. In the end, after a snowstorm struck Washington, Jefferson narrowly prevailed in the 36th ballot in the House to become the 3rd president of the United States. Judged by the raw standard of winning and keeping power, Thomas Jefferson was the most successful politician of the first half-century of the American Republic. For 36 of the 40 years between 1800 and 1840, either Thomas Jefferson himself or a self-described adherent of his served as President of the United States. This unofficial and little-noted Jeffersonian dynasty is unmatched in American history. He had a defining vision, a compelling goal: the survival and success of popular government in America. Jefferson believed the will of an educated, enlightened majority should prevail. His opponents had less faith in the people, worrying that the broad American public might be unequal to self-government. Jefferson thought that same public was the salvation of liberty, the soul of the nation, and the hope of the republic. Thomas Jefferson loved his wife, his books, his farms, good wine, architecture, Homer, horseback riding, history, France, the Commonwealth of Virginia, spending money, and the very latest in ideas and insights. He believed in America and in Americans. The nation, he said in his first inaugural address, was the world's best hope. He thought Americans themselves capable of virtually anything they put their minds to. Whatever they can, he said, they will. More than any of the other early presidents, more than Washington, more than Adams, Thomas Jefferson believed in the possibilities of humanity. He dreamed big, but understood that dreams become reality only when their champions are strong enough and wily enough to bend history to their purposes. Broadly put, philosophers think, politicians maneuver. Thomas Jefferson's genius was that he was both and could do both, often simultaneously. Such is the art of power. Thank you.